Another thing that we have to think about in this process of self-disclosure is that we have to figure out what the best channel is for our message. In other words, we have to decide how and when we are going to share the information. And the two major channels that we're going to talk about here are face-to-face and mediated. So face-to-face is happening when you are sitting live in person with the other individual, right? So you're sitting in the same room together and just talking it out. And so studies have demonstrated that face-to-face disclosures feel more genuine and intimate given that shared physical presence that you have. And one of the benefits of face-to-face communication is that we are able to receive verbal and nonverbal communication simultaneously. So we're able to not only hear the words that are coming out of the other person's mouth, but we're also able to hear how they are saying those words. And we're able to see their facial expressions and see their gestures and all of those sorts of things. And as we will learn later, nonverbal communication really adds a lot to the conversation, and there's a lot that can be lost if it is not present. So in face-to-face communication, we are able to have both the verbal as well as the nonverbal. In addition, when we are face-to-face with another person, we can do things like ask follow-up questions and demonstrate our support for the other person, or demonstrate encouragement for them by giving them a hug or something along those lines, right? There's just some things that we can do when we are face-to-face with another person that we can't do if we are not together. However, there are some risks when it comes to disclosing something face-to-face. And the biggest risk is that the person that you are disclosing this information to might have a negative reaction to the information that you're disclosing. And you might end up feeling uncomfortable because of that negative reaction. You might feel pressure to stay. You might even feel fearful of the other person. So while face-to-face disclosure does have its benefits, it also does have those risks that might not exist if you were to disclose in a more mediated setting. So mediated disclosures happen over mediated means, right? So it can happen over email, it can happen in a letter, in a text message, in a note, a phone call, a FaceTime, things like that. And so there's something between you and the other person. You're not sitting live in the same room together. And studies have demonstrated that when compared to face-to-face disclosure, mediated disclosure does tend to seem less genuine and less personal than face-to-face disclosure does. That being said, however, there are many benefits to disclosing something via mediated means. For example, we can take our time to carefully choose the words that we are using in the message that we are sending, right? When we are facing someone face to face, we don't have the luxury of time to think about how we're going to respond. Whereas when we are texting someone, for example, we can think about exactly which words we want to use, and thus we tend to have more control over the situation. In addition, there's no immediate reaction from the other person when we are communicating in this mediated way. At least it depends on the mediation that you're using, or on the media that you're using. But in a lot of cases, like with emails and text messages and letters, for example, you don't get an immediate reaction from the other person. And that can be a good and a bad thing, right? It can be a good thing in that if you are anticipating a negative reaction, there's a delay there, right? So you don't get that reaction right away. But if you're not sure what the reaction is going to be, it could be a negative thing in that you have to sit there and wait for this reaction now, right? So positives and negatives. And there are some risks when it comes to mediated communication. The biggest of these is that loss of nonverbal communication, which, as I said before, adds so much context to a conversation. And sometimes without that nonverbal communication, the verbal communication that we receive might end up being misinterpreted. And so that is a huge risk when it comes to self-disclosure, right? If the other person interprets our message incorrectly, then the disclosure hasn't gone the way that we planned. So choosing the channel, deciding how and when we're going to share this information with the other person is actually a really big part of this process of self-disclosure.